Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, recently I did a 10-second comic review of Giant-Sized X-Men Storm. Now, I do my 10-second comic reviews over in the community section of this YouTube channel. Now, these books, these giant-sized X-Men books, are a series of specials that connect to the main storyline of the current X-Men. And really, when I reviewed this book, and I really didn't like it, but when I reviewed it, it showed to me the way that these quote-unquote progressives subtly input their ideology into these stories. Because we can already see from current comics the heavy-handed overlay of this ideology, this progressive ideology, onto the stories, but there is also a very subtle way that some of these writers try to put it in. And I would say the subtle story is more dangerous than the overt story. And especially with a story like this, because I would say a story like this has at its basis an ideology of racism. And at the same time, the source of that racism completely destroys the idea of hero and virtue in itself. So I want to go over this subtle story to talk about why this is and how this progressive ideology is brought out. Because, well, with any story, your story really is a rhetorical argument. And these progressives are using this as a rhetorical argument, but they use their argumentation in a very subtle way. Some of them, anyways. For all their talk about rejecting ideas of reason and logic, some of them use it very depthly, but they use it in a way where they corrupt it. That is to say, they're sophistic, they use sophism, they use subtle bending of the rules, subtle breaking of the rules of reason and logic, so that they convince you that a weaker argument is actually the stronger, and so try to convince their reader through this rhetorical argument that they, the reader, should believe in this progressive ideology, which in itself is irrational. And one of the best ways, the most subtle ways that these storytellers do so, is to make their story, their rhetorical argument, based upon a series of givens which they never talk about, but you need to accept in order to understand what's going on in the story. And so, if you like the story, you think you understand what's going on in the story, and if you understand what's going on in the story, you must accept the givens which the story is based upon, and those givens only go back to a certain point. Those are progressive givens. Those are ideological givens. They're not actually rational and logical points. So I wanted to do this not just because of that, but also because a lot of people keep on saying to me, give us some examples. Give me some examples of what you're talking about. So I'm going to give a very concrete example of what I am talking about here today. So in order to do that, I have to give you some of the background for the recent X-Men stories written by Jonathan Hickman. Now, Jonathan Hickman, by trade, as I understand it, is a science fiction writer. He's not actually a comic book writer. That is to say, it's not his main money maker. And he has completely revamped the X-Men in his own ideas, in his own storyline. At present, the X-Men are segregationists. They live on an island, the island of Krakoa, and only mutants are allowed on this island. Physically, only mutants can enter onto this island. But at the same time, every kind of mutant is allowed on this island. Every kind of mutant can be a citizen of this island. Now, that means that not only do you have your heroes, your former heroes, I might say, such as the X-Men, but you also have every kind of villain that is a mutant imaginable. So it doesn't matter if you are formerly a hero or if you are formerly, let's say, a genocidal mass murderer like Apocalypse. Every mutant is welcome, and the slate is just wiped clean so that you can become a part of this society. Nor are these villains made second-class citizens. No, people like Apocalypse, Mr. Sinister, Magneto, they're all on the governing body of this society, along with Professor X and Cyclops and Storm, and a few others. Now, this has led to some interesting storylines, to say the least, because in order to get to this island, they use these teleportation stations, and the X-Men and the mutants around them that they are currently engaging with, they have taken these teleportation stations and placed them within the boundaries of other sovereign countries, violating their sovereignty and their borders, but this is seen as still being fine by the story, by the writer and the people who live on the island. They think this is fine because they're placing these doors within other societies, even though these other societies don't want them. So any kind of mutant, any mutant at all, can go through the doors and then become a resident of this island. Now, I say resident because they believe that all mutants, no matter where they are citizens of this island. So much so that they have even tried to kidnap children who belong to non-mutant parents because they believe those children belong with their own kind on the mutant island of Krakoa. And one of the other story elements is that the mutants used all of their most powerful geniuses in order to come up with a bunch of revolutionary medicines, and they are using this as part of their carrot and stick to get the rest of the world to recognize them as a sovereign nation. Basically, they're saying that if you want this new medicine that we have created, this new series of medicines really, then you must accept the mutant sovereignty. And of course, if you don't accept it by accepting the medicine, well, they have these Omega level mutants which have world shattering power. Of course, they're going to use that stick to make sure that the rest of the countries fall in line. So you better take the carrot, otherwise you're going to get the stick. So that's the background of these stories. Now, some of the foreground of the story is the fact that none of these mutants can die, technically, supposedly, anymore. That is to say, they can be automatically resurrected in these storylines. And really, there is no hindrance to them being resurrected, apart from the fact that sometimes there's a line. But of course, if you're more important, you jump straight to the head of the line, because it seems to be almost an oligarchical society. Now, I say seemingly resurrected because in the storyline, these characters, the people who make up this island, the X-Men and all the rest of the mutants, they see this resurrection as a continuation of their existence. Now, I would not call it anything of the kind, because what they're really doing is they're making cloned bodies which are grown from plants, and they take these husks, these cloned bodies after you die, and they implant the memories of you into them, which have been saved at some save point into Cerebro. And by the way, you can muddle with those memories and make yourself slightly different if you want to, and I'm sure the people who control the process can do that to you as well. But leaving that aside, because I've talked about that in other videos, I would not call this resurrection in any way. This is a cloned body of you with implanted memories that is existing. It's not you. But within the story, and this is key, within the story, these citizens of this island, these mutants like the X-Men, they see it as a continuation of one existence, as if they are being resurrected and they themselves are continuing to exist. Now, let's move on to the direct story from this giant-sized X-Men Storm. The basic plot of this story is that you have Storm. She's been infected by a techno-organic virus. Now, again, for those of you who don't know, a techno-organic virus is a technology-based system that acts like an organic system and acts like a virus to take over the organic parts of a body. And this is exactly what's happening to Storm. She's been infected with this techno-organic virus, and these technology parts are slowly taking over her body so that she will eventually become all technology. Well, in the storyline, she is going to die within 30 days if this happens. So, supposedly, they need to find a cure. But the point is, somebody brings up right at the beginning, why in the world are you looking for a cure anyways? If you die, you're just going to be resurrected, so why don't you just allow yourself to die and then be resurrected, and this will solve the problem because you won't be resurrected with the virus, you'll be resurrected pure and simple. And this leads to the main point of what this book really is centered around. And it's a conversation that Storm has, I'm not sure, with herself or with the audience. It seems to be with both because it references both. And it goes like this. The lingering question is, why do what I am doing? Why go through all this if I can let go and be resurrected? Why struggle? Why fight? Why not just surrender to the inevitable? Wash my hands of it and start anew. After all, what's one life when you have an endless number of them? Where's the value? How can you even define what a good life is? I'll tell you. The true measure of life is living. It isn't a series of do-overs and restarts. It's fighting for what you have, what you believe in. It's fighting for who you are. I am a mutant. I am a goddess. And I want to live. Now, when I read this little part of the text, this really irked me, and I trust my instinct when something irks me that it isn't exactly right. So it just played in my mind until I began to understand why it irked me so much. And by the way, I looked online to see how these quote-unquote progressive readers are taking this story, and this part is what they focus on. This little section of the story is what they're saying is the "Yas Queen Slay" part, which they love so much. So the progressive crowd are just eating this book up because of these statements which I have read to you. Now, originally, when I started to think about this, I thought, well, what she's doing is she's confusing who she is with what she is, and therefore it is an illogical, irrational argument. But then I said to myself, well, that might not be completely true. So I took things, and I usually go back to very simple things, simple for me anyways, at the very least in my simple mind. I took these statements and then decided to put them into the categories of logic. Now, I know, being a white man and putting things into categories, I would be automatically labeled a racist by these progressives, because that's where racism comes from, supposedly, putting things and people into categories. But let's see where the racism really lies here. So, just very briefly, when you take things logically, you can divide them into 10 categories. Those categories are quickly as follows. The first one, which is different from all the other 9, is substance. Now, substance is a thing which can exist in its own right and not just as a modification of something else. But the other 9 categories are all accidents. And accidents are things which cannot exist in their own right. They are things which do exist, but exist in another thing as in a subject. And again, very briefly, those categories are quantity, quality, relation, action, passion, where, position, when, and possession. So I'm going to concentrate on just a couple of these categories, which I can say you can break this statement down into. Because again, you have Storm, and what she's basically having is an existential crisis. She's saying, what is my life? And this is very important, because when you have people and you ask them who they are, well, usually they will give a whole bunch of accidents about themselves. This is my name. This is where I live. I'm a citizen of X. My marital status is this. I have so many children if I have children, and so on and so forth. But that's when someone else asks the question of you. If you ask the question of yourself, especially in an existential crisis when it has to deal with matters of life and death, usually you start to discard all of those accidents and go back to a substance. You start to ask the question, what am I really? What am I besides all of these accidents that attach to me? And usually you ask that question, of course, because you're thinking, well, will this continue to exist? This substance that I am, will it continue to exist even if I die? And this is really the existential crisis. Existential means last things. It's from the Greek, meaning the last. So usually when you ask that question of yourself, which is what really Storm is doing here, she's asking these existential questions of herself. Why struggle? Why fight? What is life? Where is the value in it? What can you even call a good life? How do you even define it? I found that the funny thing is here that she doesn't actually go back to substance. She concentrates still on accidents, but 2 very specific kinds of accidents, and those accidents are treated in a very specific way. Because really, again, if someone really asks these existential questions of themselves in a matter of life and death, they're going to say, well, I'm a human being. That's a substance. I'm made up of a body and a soul. Those are part of the substance. Or if you don't believe in a soul, you say, I'm a mind and a body. Again, part of the substance. And then you'll ask yourself, will this soul, will this mind continue to exist after my body has died? So you ask these questions, and these questions about yourself lead back to substance, not to accident. But she focuses on accident. She only stops at accident. She says, I'm a mutant, I'm a goddess. Now, these are accidents of what she actually is. They're not substance. Now, first of all, I want to go over I am goddess just very briefly, because she's not really a goddess, at the very least, as far as I understand it, without going through any retcons. The original story is that she was worshipped as a goddess by this primitive African tribe because she was able to bring them good weather. They simply called her a goddess because she had spectacular power and could help them out, and she took this in onto herself as if it were true. So really, it's just a subjective definition of herself. But of course, the progressives would take this subjective definition and her saying she is a goddess, and they would say, since she fully believes it, well, therefore it is true. But really, that's just a whole bunch of subjectivity, which is nonsense. Just because you believe it doesn't make it true. But we're going to leave that aside and focus on I am a mutant. Now, here we get into something very unique with this story itself. Because in the entire history of the X-Men, which at this point is what, like 70 years? Mutants have always been a subcategory of human beings. That's how they were originally written, and that's how they have been written up until, well, I would say the last few years. Because they are described as the next step in the evolution of humanity. So they are humans. They are simply a certain kind of human. But the funny thing is that within this storyline itself, they treat humans as if they were a different species, not just a different kind, as if they were a different race. So basically they're treating themselves as not only a different race of people, which is a kind, which all exist under the bigger banner of humanity. No, they're taking race of mutant kind, and they are substituting it as if they were a different species. Because within these books, there have been a number of times where they badmouth humans as if they were a different species. They say, that's the human way to do things. That's the old human way, the disgusting human way to do things. We don't do things like that. We're mutants. But of course, even though this is how it is portrayed within the story and the minds of the people within the story, it is not actually true. We know this not to be true because of the very fact that within the story itself, you can have two human beings and they give birth to a mutant. This is how the mutant race actually began to exist. They existed because human beings simply had children. And, of course, it's just simple reason and logic that two members of a species cannot give birth to a separate species. This has been known since ancient times. A man and a woman can't give birth to a cat, or a cow, or a squid. It simply cannot happen. And so it is the same with the fact that since two human beings can be the parents of a mutant, therefore mutants are humans, just a different subclassification under the larger term of human. And I've gone over all of that because human is part of a substance, whereas mutant would be part of an accident. It is part of the accident known as quality. And here's where the very subtle part of the story comes in. I would say that in this story, you have mutants, and even though they know that they are a certain race or kind within humanity, they take their race or kind as if it were humanity itself, as if it were equal to humanity itself. That is to say, as if it were a species, not a race. And in doing so, the writer betrays something that he is also doing with these statements of Storm itself. What he is doing is he is taking an accident and trying to make it into a substance. He is taking mutant, which is an accident of this character, and portraying it as if it were a substance. That is to say, he's taking the race of this character and portraying it as if it were the species, as if it were the substance of this character and all of these mutant characters itself. And that's important for progressives for one key reason, and I've always gone over this. It's the fact that these quote-unquote progressive people, they all take their ideas from the political ideological stem of socialism and communism. So what they're basically doing is they're moving backward from a point which they take to be absolutely true. And the point that they take to be absolutely true is the fact that humanity can build a perfect society, a utopia. And when they take that to be the truth, they move backwards to see how this can be true and how it can be implemented. And they come up with the following. It can be true because you can shape all of the society, and you can shape all of the people within that society to make them fit within this utopian society, and therefore it can exist. It's basically saying that right now you're a square peg and you can't fit in the round hole of utopia, but you can be whittled down to a round peg and therefore be made to fit within the round hole and then live within the utopia. But the only way that that can be actually true is if mankind has no human nature whatsoever. Because if there are any fixed points of human nature, they would have to work around them. But their assumption is that since you can be made to fit into this utopian society, you need to be completely malleable, completely changeable, and that negates any idea of a fixed human nature. Therefore, this idea of fixed human nature must be obliterated within our societies in order for this utopia to take place. This, by the way, is one of the reasons why they hate religion so much, especially Christianity, because Christianity says we were created in the image and likeness of God, and that is part of a fixed nature. If you are someone that follows just the intellectual part of Western society, you would say that you as a person are a rational animal. That rational principle is that, a principle. It is a fixed point within humanity. It cannot be changed. If you change it, you become something else than human. And therefore, it is a fixed part of your human nature. But they reject all of that because, again, you need to be completely malleable in order to get to that, what they assume to be truth of the fact that a perfect society, a utopia, can exist. And why I go over that is because of the fact that, of course, a substance is something that is fixed. A substance is something that exists within its own right. And of course, if the category of substance is in itself just like unto this idea of human nature, it too must be discarded. They cannot, in a progressive mindset, have this category of substance whatsoever. It needs to be obliterated. And this is exactly what is happening within this storyline. But again, it's being done in a very subtle way. And I just want to go over that subtlety for a second, because I would say that the useful idiots the progressives at the top use in order to bring about what they want to bring about, really, which is the accumulation of their own power, these useful idiots don't really understand this in any way. They don't believe, really, there is any kind of fixed nature. They don't believe in reason. They don't believe in logic. They don't believe in any of these things. Unless, of course, they can use them as a hammer to hammer you over the head with in order for you to believe what they believe. But when you look at the implementation of their political ideology on a grander scale, on the top scale of the people who are trying to implement it, you'll see that they use reason and logic very deftly, and they use these ideas of what a human being is. They accept them, but then they corrupt them very slightly. That is to say, they accept that they need to be there in order for their control still to take hold, so they can't obliterate them completely. They know this. The people at the bottom, they try to obliterate everything just in this ham-fisted way. But the people at the top, the people who are really subtle about it, they will say to themselves, no, look, if we wish to maintain control, there needs to be a certain structure. We need to have that structure. We're just going to corrupt the top bit of that structure in order to make sure that we are the ones in control. And so they use this structure, these categories, in a very depth way. They're saying basically that we cannot have substance. We cannot have this category of substance because it interferes with our political ideology. But we know that this category is very much needed for this system that we have presently to exist. Because if it's not there, everything is going to fall apart, and therefore our control of everything will fall apart as well. Therefore, we need to take an accident and put it into the category of substance as if it were a substance to make it look like a substance. But of course, we all agree that it isn't a substance because no substance can really exist. It will simply be a proxy that is supposed to be there in order to stand in for actual substance again, which doesn't exist. And this is what you see within this statement itself. They're taking mutant, this race of mutant, and they are taking it, an accident, and trying to make it the substance whereby she is defining herself, even though they know very well it isn't a substance. Now, I would say this is exactly what is happening around you in the world today, with all of this race theory going on. They take the race and they say, well, this race, which is an accident of quality, it is actually the substance whereby you exist, you people of color. Your race is how you need to define yourself. It is your substance. It is not an accident. Or at the very least, you have to treat it as a substance, even though we know substance really doesn't exist. So basically, they're saying that even in the ultimate way of thinking about yourself, when it comes down to the existential question of who you are, what you are, because it's a matter of life and death, you can only go this far. You can only go as far as your race. And you can treat that as if it were a substance, but you don't have any substance beyond that at all. Now, this is important to me for many different reasons. The first being that it completely destroys the idea of a hero, the traditional idea of a hero that I'm always going on about. Because traditionally, in Western civilization, for 3,000 years, the idea of a hero is a paragon of virtue. Those virtues are a very specific number and a very specific order. And in order to have those virtues, you need to train yourself through habit to have the virtues which you can then embody, which then can make you into a paragon of virtue. And the point being that, well, these habits, these virtues that are habits, I usually like to think about it in terms of going to the gym. When you go to the gym, you go to the gym because you wish to make your muscles stronger. You want to become stronger. But in order to become stronger, in order for that going to the gym to actually have any impact, you need to do it in a regimented way. You need to make sure that you go on a regular basis. And when you get there, you do repetitive motions of one kind or another, like reps. So you do a number of reps on this muscle in order for it to become stronger. And if you do this again and again, and if you continue to do it on a regular schedule, then you will become stronger. By the way, I would say the same is true for your mind, just the reps for your mind are memorization. If you take something that you have memorized, or you begin to memorize something and you repeat it over and over again throughout the week, it is the building up of the muscle of your mind, just as if you were going to the gym. Memorization is going to the gym for your mind. But the same can be said for virtue. The same can be said for any habit. This is exactly what happens through your life. If you wish to build up these muscles of virtue, you need to do so through habit. Habit is just like those reps. It's just like that regiment of going to the gym every second day. This is exactly what is going on within you as well. It's the same thing. If you do it repeatedly over and over again in small increments over time, you build up those muscles of virtue. And when you build up those muscles of virtue, they become part of who you are, and therefore you can become a paragon of virtue, and that paragon of virtue can become a hero. This, in Western civilization, is the only way to become a hero. But just as going to the gym requires willpower, just as making sure you adhere to that schedule of going to the gym and doing a certain number of reps needs to be supported by your will to actually do so, so it is the same with the habits that you need in order to build up your muscles of virtue. And this is supremely important. If you get rid of the will, you get rid of your ability to build up these habits, which gets rid of the ability to be virtuous, and then gets rid of the ability to be a hero. But the point is, within Western civilization, where does that will come from? What is it? Where can you put it according to these categories of logic? Well, that will is substance. It is part of the substance of you as a human being. And therefore, if you get rid of that idea of substance, if you get rid of that category, you get rid of the idea of hero completely. And getting rid of that category of substance leads to a number of very important outcomes. Because those habits, those virtues, how you act, is actually an accident. It itself, too, is under the category of quality. But of course, it is a category of quality that is a subject to the substance of the will. Or to put it another way, it is a proximate source of power. It is not the source of power in itself, but it is a proximate source. I like to think of it in terms of the fact that you have a mirror and you're taking the light of the sun and you're shining it upon something. That light of the sun is hitting that other thing, but the mirror is the proximate source of that power. It is not the source of power in itself. The substance is the sun. That is the real source of power. And if we look at this story and see exactly what is going on with Storm here, and it is a reflection of what is going on in the larger society with the idea of race, you see that they take this accident of quality. Now, this accident of quality can be broken down into two separate subsections, and those separate subsections are how a thing acts and how a thing is. Now, how a thing acts includes these ideas of virtues. But when you look at something like your race, it is how a thing is. So what they're doing is they're separating this quality and saying that the quality of how a thing acts is governed by the quality of how a thing is, and they're treating this quality of how a thing is as if it were a substance, which it is not. Or in other words, they're saying that the quality of how a person acts is determined by the quality of something like their race, the quality of something like the color of their skin, the quality of your gender. This is the determining so-called substance that is actually prompting you to act in the way that you do. And this is very important because, again, of the idea of will. Because, again, if you are a hero because of your virtue, and your virtue in the traditional sense is formed by the substance of your will, which is the real source of power that goes through the proximate, the local source of power, which is virtue, then you become a hero through this mechanism. But if you look at the current progressive ideology and what is being expressed here, they're saying that your proximate source of power, which is how you act and being virtuous and being heroic, it comes from how you are, how a thing is. That is to say, from your race. In substituting how a thing is for substance, they're saying your race is the actual source of your power. And just quickly, when I'm talking about power here, when we're talking about someone like, for instance, Storm, I'm not talking about the power of her mutant power. I'm talking about the power to be a good person, the power to be virtuous, the power to be a hero. But the thing is that if your race is the source of your power, or other things like your race, like your gender, is the source of your power, all of these things, of course, have nothing to do with your free will. You do not choose what the color of your skin is. You do not choose what kind of genitalia you are born with. And I'm sorry, it doesn't matter if you change what kind of genitalia you have during the time that you are alive. You still have the same chromosomes, so you're still either male or female as you have been born. But the point being that you do not have any say in how these things are brought about. Again, you don't have any say in the color of your skin. You don't have any say on whether you're male or female. You don't. You don't have any say where you were born. All of these accidents are something that are imposed upon you. And of course, if this is the actual source of your power, according to their ideology, you don't have any control over the source of that power at all. Not like in the traditional sense, where it is the will that is the source of power that goes through the proximate source of power, which is the virtues. And by the way, just very quickly, why these people say that whiteness cannot exist in the same way is because they take whiteness and they put it into a different category. They take whiteness and say it is a possession. White skin, according to their progressive ideology, is just like owning a piece of property, a piece of, by the way, private property, which you will therefore leverage in order to gain some power for yourself. So if you are white, the color of your skin is a possession, not a quality like it is for people of color. And of course, according to the fundamentals of their ideology, which are socialism and communism, the idea of private property and the ability to trade upon that private property in a way where you can gain profit, that is to say, capitalism, both of those things are evil. Therefore, as a white person, you cannot do that. You cannot go onto the streets like you've seen in the last year, where you have these masses of people shouting black power and have it be okay if you are white and doing the same thing. Why? Because if that power is to come from your white skin and you're asking for the same, you're using, of course, systems of oppression, systems of evil that allow you to leverage your possession of your white skin through private property and capitalism, again, which are evil. But really, the point is, with this story, is that this is the subtlety in the background that you need to accept in order to understand the story. And if you like the story, you think you understand it, and therefore you accept what is going on in the background. You accept their givens. And their given is the fact that you take quality, the quality of race, and you make it as if it were a substance. You take the accident of how a thing is, its race, and you make it as if it were the actual source of power, not just the proximate source of power for how a thing acts. Therefore, it is your race or your gender that makes you a hero. It is your race or your gender that makes you either a demon or a saint. And, once again, it has nothing to do with your actual will. It is something that is imposed upon you, and this is the really insidious part. Because in portraying these quote-unquote heroes in this way, in making this the basis of these stories in order for you to understand them, they're saying to the people who accept them, who like them, it's saying that, well, look, if you accept this in the background, you accept the fact that you're not in control of your own life, nor should you be. You should be like these heroes, these quote-unquote heroes, these paragons which we present to you. They are the idol by which you should live. They are the standard by which you should live. You should have the exact same mindset and live in that way. And just like them, just like Storm here, you yourself, in your mind, you can only go back to this point. And this point says that you have really no control over your own self. Your will is subject to these accidents upon which you have no control. And if you accept this mindset, you accept the mindset whereby you forfeit the control over your own life. Because your will doesn't actually control what and who you are, how you act, how you will get along in life. All of that is controlled by these larger institutions. All of that has been predetermined for you. Predetermined, of course, by those with power. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.